You're listening to the MindPod Network. Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. Head on over to iTunes and leave this podcast a rating and or a review. It's all happening. 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 Hello, friends. Welcome to the podcast. Here we all are, episode 128 of the It's All Happening with Zach Leary podcast. That's me. I'm your host. So happy to be joining you in the oral space of learning, devotion, inspiration, psychonautics, and whatever other mischief we can conjure up in this time together. And I know there are many airlines to choose in the podcasting space. So an immense bit of gratitude coming from me for all of you who listen week in and week out. Thank you so much for that. This week on the podcast, we have Visvambhar Sheth. We call him Vish for short. Vish is a Kirtan artist, and he is the leader of a group called the Mayapuris, but he also has his own Kirtan career outside of that. But he's not just a Kirtan artist. I mean, the Kirtan is the mechanism, is the vehicle in which he delivers his wisdom, his devotion, and his, method for how to lead a better life, for finding divinity within yourself and within the world around you and applying that to your daily life. Kirtan, chanting these names in this fashion is, again, the vehicle he uses. But Vish is really a brilliant guy and a brilliant mind, and I think you'll enjoy the podcast a lot. So we'll get we'll get into it more with Vish in a second. But let's talk a little bit about the last 10 days. Since we last podcasted, as everybody knows who is alive on planet Earth, especially in America, there was an election. And that election, of course, was filled with many, many twists and turns. The GOP kept the Senate, sadly. But there were many great victories for the liberal part of America. The Democrats took over the House of Representatives. The first openly gay governor took a seat in Colorado. 2 Muslim women were elected to the House of Representatives. Adam Schiff is now the chair of the Intelligence Committee, and on and on and on. It definitely, I think, highlighted and, even brought out the obvious into the front and center even more, that the divide between rural America and urban America is stronger than ever. So, interestingly, what happened just about immediately after the elections here in California was that wildfires once again reared their ugly head and blazed a horrific, destructive path in northern and southern California. But what we're noticing here in Southern California, and who knows, how woo-woo we want to get, but there's no doubt that Mother Earth is listening to the collective tension and the collective thinking of the humans who reside on her rock. And maybe she got pissed about the elections too. But what we're seeing here is, as these fires continue to blaze and do destruction in Malibu and other parts of Los Angeles, that, you know, the next time you come across a climate change denier who says that 1 degree in a global increase of temperatures is just part of the natural order of things, or says, that ain't much, point to these events. Because if California continues to burn at this rate per annum, it will result in parts of the state becoming just too risky to live in, rendering them uninhabitable. You know, so while the Democratic Party has done its fair share to aid fossil fuels and Wall Street and all of these things, there's no doubt that it pales in comparison to the GOP's outright denial of the man-made influence of CO2's increase into our atmosphere. So we can't rely on government. We have to rely on our own personal behavior as well. God knows there are plenty of places where I could improve. Stop using so much plastic, drive a better car, all of these things. But our economic system that is set up as a result of the industrial revolutions, of the infrastructure that was created there to satisfy our desire and the culture of more, it's now so entrenched into our consciousness that it's almost impossible to imagine a world without it. But we have to, because if we don't, this is going to be happening more and more and more. Where is the balance between innovation and a return to the earth? Where is the balance between responsible growth and responsible technology and a return to less? Where is it? So yes, let's get into the podcast with Visvambhar Vish Sheth, Vish as he is affectionately known. And if you go to Mayapuris.com, Mayapuris, they are doing a Kickstarter to get their new album off the ground. But Vish has been doing this since the age of 5. He's played at BhaktiFest, where this was actually recorded at. The Omega Institute, Beloved Festival, Wanderlust, all around the world. He is an in-demand Mridanga player, recording artist, singer, and all-around devotee who I think is part of the future of how Eastern devotional practices will continue to expand and grow in the West for years to come. So, enjoy the podcast.
Vasudha prana vallabha janava jivita.
Vish, thank you for coming. Thank you for doing this.
Yes.
It's beautiful to have you. So, I've known you for some years and seen you, and shared Kirtan with you. And I'd like to start because you have a unique view, I think, on spirituality and Eastern spirituality as it is manifested in the West, in that you grew up in it. You have kind of taken birth into the culture, which not everybody has. So tell me, I'm going to kind of just start. We'll use your chronology as sort of our way to jump into different topics and stuff. But I'd like to start there about growing up in the culture that you did and how that worked and how you were exposed to it.
My parents, I come from a biracial, my father's from India, my mother's Italian American, and both of them are joined the Hare Krishna, tradition in their kind of 20s, and it's been interesting to see two people who have a completely different approach to spirituality come together even though they apparently belong to the same religion, they follow it in completely unique ways. And so to have that in my life has been, has been a blessing in a way, because I feel that we all approach it in our own way, and that's allowed me to kind of appreciate the individuality of spiritual approach.
Well, and this is what we were talking about yesterday a little bit. And, for a lot of people, and certainly everybody who listens to this podcast, some are more kind of in the Bhakti community than others and stuff. But tell us a little bit about what Krishna consciousness is.
Well, I'll start with saying what about the wider Bhakti community.
Yeah.
Bhakti is one of the rings in the ladder of yoga, and it speaks to devotional practices, personal devotional practices, in a mood of love and offering everything as much as possible that we can to something higher than us. And in Krishna consciousness specifically, that attention or that focus is put towards Krishna as the divine Godhead, as the culmination or the quintessence of all spirit, of all divinity. So everything is divine. Everywhere we look is part of God's creation. Every element, our being, our very being, and everything is seen in that way. And the name Krishna, or that personality behind the name Krishna, is the epitome of it all. Everything emanates from that source of all love.
I mean, I've always been very attracted to that term Krishna consciousness, because, in many of the sort of esoteric, traditions that stem from the counterculture, whether it's yoga, Buddhism, or psychedelic consciousness, that word consciousness is quite that term is used very loosely at times. So this idea that, this phrase that Srila Prabhupada, kind of put together, this idea of Krishna consciousness. But how does that, because I look at consciousness as sort of a plane of existence, and it's going on with you or without you. You being alive doesn't necessarily have much to do with it at all. It's going to be there with or without you. So what is, I want to just go even deeper into it though. What is Krishna consciousness? How is that manifested into just the infinite?
Listening to a lot of different kind of scientists and scholars and people speaking about, spiritual topics or touching upon spiritual topics, one of the things I feel that's really missing from even in saying conversations about artificial intelligence, so to say, one thing that's missing from it, I feel, is that where is all of this coming from? And the idea that that something that is kind of, in a sense, material or mundane can reproduce itself. I feel that is kind of a conversation that doesn't really go anywhere, because consciousness is the source of everything. It actually has to come from a conscious source that then multiplies and becomes more consciousness. And
sentient.
Is
that a requirement, you think?
Yes. I mean, we speak of life.
Yes.
And life is consciousness. Consciousness is the kind of what we see of life, how we perceive it, is that there's consciousness. So I guess you could say sentient would for me be, and even if it creates non-sentient intelligence somehow, it's and that expands into itself, it's still going to be stemming from some type of sentience or place, a source of consciousness.
And specifically with artificial intelligence, I'm not 100% convinced about this, but I certainly like to thread the discussion, is that I think it's very possible that, a divine, let's just say Krishna in this case, could very possibly have sparked this thing that we're calling artificial intelligence to have Krishna and its glory kind of live on forever, because it is in a way a different dimension. And I know a lot of people, well, it is mundane and it's flat and it doesn't have breath and blood, and it can't necessarily sing Kirtan, but it is this other place, and maybe maybe it's supposed to live on there.
From and from some kind of like a Vedic perspective.
Sure.
From the Vedas, the ancient teachings of the Vedas stemming from India. Actually, it's all everything that we perceive is in a sense artificial.
Yeah, right.
And our consciousness has become artificially connected to something that is not. It's called Maya, which is not.
That which is
not. So when we're interacting with things and even thinking that existence ends at some point, like the body dies. Yes, that is true, but to understand that the actual spirit in religious aspect called spirit, and in a more open-ended way it's called consciousness, continues to exist because that energy is ever existing.
Right.
It can't burn itself out, really. So that going back to that source or that what is that life that continues? That's, I would say, one of the primary approaches to Krishna consciousness would be that this vehicle that is continuing to hold consciousness, whatever that vehicle is, may change, but the actual consciousness itself continues on.
I see. Yes, and so it can continue on, and then is that source, that divine source, does that continue on? Is that divine source, is that within us, or is it something that's on the outside and we're looking to connect with?
That's been, I think, that's been a big place of discussion.
Yeah.
Of whether that source is us or whether that source is something that we approach. And from the Bhakti teachings of Chaitanya, who's also another great saint and considered to be an avatar in the Bhakti tradition, he says that it's both. And in Bhakti, I feel like that oneness and that separation is what is that play.
That's the play. Yes.
Because there is the union, and there is that it's in me, it is me, I can be that, and at the same time I'm not that, and I'm always trying to connect with that.
And I'm longing for that.
And that separation is that allows that play to happen. It's esoteric and it can sound kind of out there, but I feel like it's also it's very much how we interact in this world. This world is a reflection of reality, of true reality.
Well, and it is esoteric, but that's one of the reasons why I like to really kind of explore the personality of Radharani, because Radha is, she is a manifestation of the goddess, but yet she's like, and you see how she's depicted so often and how we talk about her, she's like longing. She's just longing for that union of her beloved, which is Krishna and the divine. And so much of that is this play, this push and this pull and this push and this pull. And she's sitting there kind of like, oh my gosh, I just need to experience that sound of the flute one more time. But yet she's the goddess too. You know, so it's like, oh wow, okay, so she's both.
And it's so nice, so wonderful that you bring up Sri Radha, because she is the goddess of devotion. She's the goddess of bhakti, and if the example, she's goddess, she's the full feminine expansion of divinity, of Godhead, and at the same time, even in her play, she is experiencing this separation, and so for us as bhaktas, or as aspiring devotees, aspiring practitioners of devotion, it's not a means to an end. The practice is not that I do this practice and I'm going to get to a place and I'm going to connect with Source and then it's all good from there.
Yeah, right.
It just continues on. That the practice that I'm doing now will only continue to get deeper and deeper and deeper, and I will, and there will be no end to the love and fulfillment that I get from the practices itself. And at the same time, it may be painful. I will still have emotion. I'll still have devotion is a very emotional thing, because it's dealing with there is sadness, there is even to extent of jealousy or envy in it all. So we have these things in a more kind of Zen way. Maybe it's like coming to a platform of equanimity and kind of just this, like, a plain, like an ocean, a lake that doesn't move, isn't moved by the wind or anything. But I think it's very turbulent, actually. I feel turbulence in this world, and I feel that that will always be there. But where do I direct that towards? Where do I direct that emotion towards? I think that's the question that comes up in this discussion and in discussion.
Well, when you direct that towards, in your tradition, you spoke earlier of the mood, but there's often this reference of you are trying to please God, you're trying to please the divine, and it's an act of pleasing Krishna or an act of pleasing Sri Radha or something like that. But like where you're saying, where you're going to, if the world is turbulent and you're going to focus this somewhere, and that act of pleasing. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that is, it's, for people who are not deep into the bhakti community, it's often misunderstood. So what does that mean, to please? Like you're doing these acts of service, of seva, or, I mean, I guess Kirtan is like that as well, but to please Krishna. Why do you need to do that? Like, why isn't Krishna always pleased?
Even just as I feel separation from a loved one,
yes,
so the divine is also feeling separation from us. And each one of us is created individually with our own emotion and our own feeling and our own connection to that source. Each and every conscious living, as they call a living entity, or every entity, which entities are all pervading. Each one is created with its own individual, completely unique attributes that are a manifestation of divinity, and that are meant to reconnect for the pleasure of that divine. And that my purpose is just to be completely myself, to embody that completely, and through actions is maybe the beginning steps, because what I do is very important. So what I eat, when I'm cooking, my meditation can be that I'm not making this for myself anymore, taking myself out of the center and putting the beloved within the center of everything that I do. So whether it's my eating, or whether it's even to the extent of my sex life, I'm gonna do my best in every activity that I do to offer it to the beloved, and take myself out of the center with humility, and know that my offering my unique individual offering is what gives pleasure to God. Does Krishna need my offering?
Yes.
Not at all.
Right.
But
my question.
But just as, I guess the example is there of just like a child, you buy a child some chocolate and the child says, would you like some back? It gives some satisfaction that my what I'm giving is being reciprocated. And we all want we all want to receive love. We want to, because as to take the kind of Christian saying that we're created in the image of God.
Yeah.
But in the Vedic perspective, not only are humans created in the image of God, but everything is in the image of God.
Right.
And so God can come, Krishna can come as a fish or a turtle or as an amphibian or all different species in the different avatars as they speak of. So our so it's not just the human form.
Okay, so what is then going on the other side, doing something that is not pleasing to Krishna? And I tend to look at it, and I think this is kind of in line with Vedic philosophy, as a sort of an energetic disturbance. Like if we're recording this podcast right now on the patio of a room here at BhaktiFest, and I go into this room and I take something that does not belong to me. It's like I'm creating this energetic disturbance. It's like you're breaking this trust, and you're breaking the energetic field and making it kind of yucky, I guess. But it's like, so what is, and I feel that is not pleasing to Krishna. But yeah, but is that kind of what it's like? I mean, about not pleasing Krishna, and what is it that you do that's not pleasing to Krishna? Because there's no way we can be perfect, right? I mean, I don't think so. I haven't met anyone yet, or, I've met some pretty saintly people, but it's pretty hard to be perfect. So we're all going to kind of descend from the mountain a little bit. Yeah. I don't know.
I would say that in kind of the bhakti context, the original sin, to say, is our desire to be the controller, to be the enjoyer, to be the kind of put myself in the center and let everybody, a selfishness of let everything revolve around me and everything serve me. That is kind of the
greed,
and that ends up being the root of, say, if we want to say displeasing to Krishna, but it's in a way free will is there. So that free will is like, oh well, then you choose to use everything that I've given for yourself as opposed to pleasing me. So here's all facility for you to be the enjoyer. That's when we come into that artificial Maya illusion, where we start to think that I am the enjoyer and everything is going to be used for my enjoyment, and so I wouldn't, and that's when we start to come into illusion and karma and all of the things that start to bind us more. But I don't think that it's Krishna doing any, like Krishna's just allowing us the free will to be bound or not,
and to make good choices or not.
Yeah, that's
right?
Well, that's that is we're created with the will to make the choice, and whether we choose to reconnect or whether we choose to disconnect. And the more things that we do that make us disconnected from Krishna or even from our true self, because we know that there's things that I do that are not good for me, and still I choose to do those things. I think that God is, Krishna is full of compassion. So he's an ocean of compassion. So there's no sense of, oh well, you're damned, or you're
Right.
There's constant reaching out. There's constant reminders for us to come back, and even if we have to go you know, if you speak of reincarnation through lifetimes and lifetimes, it's always only to find our path back.
And you can do that at any time.
That there's much that can displease Krishna, actually. You know, it's just our own desire to lord it over, you know, become lorded over kind of nature.
Well, we live in this age, and perhaps I'd love for you to define it for us, what's called the Kali Yuga, which is the kind of, well, as you said, an age of turbulence. You know, we're in this age of turbulence now. Is that, it's kind of a two-part thread here, and I'd love for you to describe what the Kali Yuga is, but can our actions, if we kind of all band together and kind of start making better choices, you know, can that disrupt the Kali Yuga and create a more harmonious existence for humanity? Or is it just the way it is right now? And is it going to end at some point? Like, that's what I never understand about the Kali Yuga. It's sort of, well, hey, if we're going to do all of these things and spread Krishna consciousness everywhere, or at the very least, yoga, can we put a stop to this, or is this just the way it is?
There's definitely, to some degree, a fatalistic approach to Kali Yuga, that it's kind of like, it's going down the drain, and, you know, there's predictions of how people will become, you know, shorter, and they'll start living in tunnels. And I'm hearing about people talking about building tunnels under LA and all types of things.
Well, the mole people in New York.
You know, So, you know, so there is a some type of that, and Kali Yuga itself is a in the kind of Vedic understanding of, or if you look at it as a timeline, there's almost a devolution of consciousness been happening since the golden ages to now what is sometimes called the Bronze Age, or, you know, you call it even the plastic age, right? You know, it's like, it's just horrible what we're doing. Yeah. And at the same time, so this age of quarrel, hypocrisy, we see it in the highest levels of, and these are examples of Kali Yuga progressing. At the same time, as there's always been this struggle between the divine and demoniac forces, you know, the gods and the demons are churning the milk ocean, and all these metaphors are there of this struggle that is metaphor for what's happening within us and what's happening in the wider, you know, collective consciousness. But as you may say, the Kali forces are growing, there is also a growth of, to counteract that, there's a growth of more conscious forces.
Yes, there is.
And our part is to you know, within us, strengthen the consciousness, strengthen the pure consciousness, lessen the forces of Kali within us, and collectively, and start to strengthen each other collectively within that. And the predictions are also there that through the Bhakti movement, and specifically through the Kirtan movement, which is considered to be the chanting of God's names, are in different ages. In the past ages, it was much more difficult to attain the state of self-realization that is more easily accessible to us now in the Kali. So although it's like dark, and it's supposedly going to get only more so,
before it gets better,
it actually gives us an opportunity within that, a very easy opportunity, which is the chanting of God's names. It makes it very easy to start to nullify the effects of Kali.
Okay. And nullifying the effects, though, I think in turn kind of changes our behavior as well.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I tend to notice.
You know, as we going back to like what that Krishna consciousness, or reconnecting with pure source, offering our existence to what it originally is meant for, and being in our true nature allows us to, will align us in a better way to be a force of good.
So you have, you have this gift of sharing Kirtan with the world, and it's the path of seva and art as well, and music that you have chosen as your way to communicate, I think, this message. In tandem with you kind of growing up in this culture and being surrounded by it, when did you start gravitating towards music and its transcendental nature? I mean, for me, I discovered Kirtan, I guess, midway through life, but the power, the transcendental nature of music, of high consciousness music, was the first thing that saved my life. So when did you start grabbing onto this?
I've actually been
forever, the whole time.
At least in this life, I've been. Kirtan was the first music that I ever heard, and
it was.
Yeah, wow, and actually to the extent where I didn't discover the Beatles until I was like 13. And before that, it was all Kirtan, all bhajan, from Indian singers. And I've been around some of the best Kirtan musicians
your whole life
in the world.
Yeah.
And they may not even be known in the Western world, but I've trained with them and learned from them, and I've been drumming and singing since I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Wow.
So, and always, somehow my interest in that was always encouraged by my parents and by the older practitioners. It wasn't until I was like 13 that I started to I came out of, I lived in an ashram in India, in Vrindavan. I was a young little monk boy wearing yellow robes, shaved head, and waking up at 3:30 and meditating for 2 to 3 hours every day, and practicing music for hours, and studying, hundreds of verses and memorization.
Wow.
So I came out of that, caught a flight back to America at the age of 13. I had no shoes on the plane. I wore no I didn't even own a pair of shoes. I came back to America and started, and I kind of discovered like the Beatles, and then I heard this music, and it was just like, I had lived so isolated. I'd been so isolated from it all. I go to my mom and I'm like, you kept this from me the whole time? Because my mom is like, she's a old hippie,
Yeah.
Like she grew up with it, but she just never introduced me to that stuff. And through that, I started to discover, like, for me, Kirtan was just, that's what it was. Like, I never thought of myself as a musician or anything like that. It was just, our practice was to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. We're already playing a drum and dancing and singing in the temple, and that's what I did all my life. So then to kind of discover music and the wider, playing of instruments, and I started to learn guitar and almost for a little while, like, distance myself from Kirtan because I wanted to experience.
Oh, okay.
I started to just want to play music.
Yeah.
And but Kirtan, people always need a good drummer, and it's always like, hey, can you come drum for me? And I could never say no because it's what I love to do. Flip that back.
There we go. Yeah, just turned a little bit. Yeah, and I mean, I think the one aspect, if I had to sort of pick or sort of just associate with one aspect of the Bhakti tradition, which I really think could reach a larger audience. Like, I get philosophically how, Vedic philosophy and the scriptures, like, as much as I'd like more people to read it and understand it, they might not. in the West, and that's just the way it is. But Kirtan, on the other hand, I do kind of feel that there is something there that is for everybody.
I totally agree, and I feel that it allows everyone to come individually with their own from their own place.
And let's talk. Yes, the individual thing. Yes. We have our philosophies. We have maybe the things that we feel separate us. But when we come together and we chant as one voice, that all gets offered back to the source, and it all comes. All the individual expressions come from that one source. So in Kirtan, everyone is involved in singing. Everyone it takes part in it, and it's such a beautiful way. Personally, one of my personal philosophies is like, if I can't do Kirtan with somebody, then there's something really wrong there's something wrong with me. And because that's the one thing that we all can have in common is let's call back. And even if someone doesn't have a musical background or they don't think that they have a voice, I've actually done Kirtan for deaf people. We did Kirtan for deaf people, which was really interesting because deaf and dumb people, they weren't singing with us, but they could feel the vibration. Wow.
And they could actually feel, especially the drumming, because the rhythm, like I don't know if you know, like snakes, the snake charmer, although they appear to be playing a flute, they're actually tapping their foot because snakes don't have ears. Snakes can't hear, but they feel the vibration of the tapping of the flute player, snake charmer's foot, and that's how they move.
I did not know that.
So the deaf and dumb people, they were even taking part in Kirtan by feeling not just the, let's say, high vibrations of spiritual sound which they can't hear, but the actual drumming rhythm vibrating in the atmosphere.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Yeah, and you talked about the individuality and everybody kind of bringing what it is that they can offer to the call, or however you want to look at it. But that's we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, and just to jump around a little bit, but there's a common misunderstanding, I think, within any spiritual path that's practiced by a large number of people, is that in order to practice it, you have to do it one way. And if you are going to do it that one way, you're going to conform, you're going to join an institution, you're going to, I mean this with the most love just to make the point, but you're going to have to shave your head and wear orange robes, and it's all or nothing, dude. You're either in or out, but it's not the case. So, infusing this individuality into the practice of bhakti, and you embody that very well. And but how does that work though? And and as a teacher, where do you see people struggle with that?
To keep a large body of people together and having a common goal, it takes some organization.
Of course.
It takes some type of hierarchy.
You have to pay the rent.
And at the same time, one thing I love about the wider bhakti community is this celebration of everyone's unique offering. And this festival that we're at right now, this BhaktiFest, and there's so many different styles of the Kirtan offerings, and everybody and different lineages and multiple approaches to that, and at the same time, there is, in the collective consciousness, it is about, even if people don't know, even people have come and they don't know what bhakti is, they're still here in the energy of it, in the energy field of it, and they're going to get sucked into it. There's no doubt that it's going to happen. I feel that I celebrate in that. I do come from a kind of lineage or institution, you could say, that has has wanted people to conform, and maybe that's why I don't have a shaved head anymore, and I, just don't necessarily. But it's because bhakti is the yoga of the heart, and we can't judge someone else's level of spiritual, kind of enlightenment through how they dress or exactly what they do or stuff like that, because it's really internal. There's so many examples of great saints who behaved like madmen or did things that were completely out of moral or ethical norms, but they're celebrated as saints, and somehow they were connected in that, So I personally feel that we can't judge. At the same time, there can be, if one chooses a specific path, then there are certain guidelines or that may help one to, help me to progress towards that goal.
And is that why? I guess the precepts or sort of the style of ISKCON is the way that it is. There are these guidelines that are suggested for you to take on in order to achieve this ultimate state, this ultimate mood, right? And that's why the guidelines, like, the regs and all these different sort of, is that the idea?
I would say that also, where it came from, if you look at it historically, a bunch of hippies coming to this like very, very conservative devotional path, and kind of needing those rails to keep them going. Otherwise, it could just turn into mayhem. And it has continued till now. So to its benefit, it has. It didn't get derailed. It actually has continued.
Well, that was always the great, to me, the sort of the great wonder of the Hare Krishna movement, because yes, it is kind of a conservative devotional path, but it stemmed from the counterculture. Prabhupada went after the hippies in the Lower East Side of New York, who were the most undisciplined, flighty, airheady people in the whole world, and somehow it worked.
Right.
Yeah.
They needed a change. They whatever they were doing, they weren't getting what they were looking for out of it, and I think that they needed to completely kind of do a, what do they call it, 360, or completely turn their lives around. My understanding of at least since you bring up Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, in his personal interactions with people, he was very kind and compassionate. Definitely in his presentation, in his books, and in his philosophical teachings, he was encouraging his practitioners to come to a very, very high standard, which is very regulated, but beyond that regulation, he has spoken about, and in the Bhakti traditions, it's like you do the practice, like say, I can use an example of music. You do the practice, like if you have a music teacher, the teacher says you sit down for this amount of time and you do these scales and you go up and down and you do this stuff. And as one becomes better at it, then they can kind of spontaneously start to riff within that. And I feel that it's a neophyte kind of place to just be attached to the regulations. They're there as guidelines, but then to come to a more, the word is out there, sahaja, which means a more natural. It becomes natural. It becomes spontaneous. It becomes easier without so much thought and.
It becomes second nature.
Yeah, it becomes our second nature.
Second nature. And, the idea of sadhana, which is, daily spiritual practice of some kind. This is why it's so important. I don't know about you, but I'm someone who did not grow up in a very disciplined, religious household. So the idea of of discipline, or this idea of sort of like, not being sort of flighty and all over the place and esoteric, and this idea of kind of being just grounded and disciplined and having like, okay, this is my singular purpose of today, and I'm going to see it through, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. So, I wonder what you think, for someone who grew up in it. Is it human nature to be undisciplined and to be kind of turbulent and chaotic? I don't know. I'm trying to...
My life is pretty undisciplined, actually, in a sense that, if I try to think of anything there's nothing that I do every single day. I wish that there was. I looked up to people who do something every single day. I think that, as a musician, I look up to musicians who practice or whatever every single day. As a devotional practitioner, as a chanter, I look to people who chant every single day. Personally, I do struggle with that. But coming back to maybe what I was speaking, my parents. So my father, he wakes up every single day, and he just is a disciplined person in his approach to life.
Indian?
Yes.
Okay.
And, and it's very easy for him. It's his second nature is to do that, is to wake up at a certain time and meditate for a certain time, and, and he's regulated in that. And my mom, it's funny because Prabhupada said, chant Hare Krishna and be happy.
Right.
And my mom sometimes she jokes, she's like, you chant Hare Krishna and I'll be happy. But at the same time, I see her spiritual path without sadhana necessarily. Mom, hope you don't mind me bringing you into this. And it's just about being happy and about loving, and Krishna's at the center of it, but there isn't necessarily like a rigidity to it. And so seeing these two paths, bhakti express itself in two completely unique ways, for me has allowed me to not to be accepting of others and to be more accepting of where I'm at.
And you're somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I got that dual personality thing. Sometimes I get on it and I'm like, boom, boom, boom. And sometimes it's like, I'm just going to chill and, and be in nature, go be in nature and just connect in that way, as opposed to like sit in my room and meditate.
Well, and now, being a father, and you have your band, it's called the Mayapuris, and, I know you have your own, you sing Kirtan on your own as well, but, Chaitanya had this, I know I'm going to get it wrong, but in every village, what's the phrase?
Every town and village.
Every town and village, yes. And I'm not trying to be controversial or put you on the spot, but I look to the younger generation now. I mean, guys like Krishnadas or whoever, they're older. They're not going to be doing this forever. It's just not going to be possible. Is it important to kind of keep bringing this to every town and every village, into possibly a secular world as well, just to get them chanting the names? Or does it have to be insular? How does that work?
Yeah. I would say the reason I'm here at BhaktiFest is because my belief is that the prediction of every town and village is going to happen with or without me. With or without ISKCON.
Yes.
It's going to happen, and it's already happening. There is chanting going on in so many places that no Hare Krishna person has been to, or even say they don't even know Chaitanya or these personalities that we're talking about, but the chanting is going on there. So it's going to happen. So my approach to it is either I can choose to be part of that, of the prediction, which is going to take place because it's a divine prediction, or I choose to insulate myself into,
Yeah, and I get it. I was once at you were there at the Kirtan Mela in Mumbai once, and there's just Kirtan wallahs, I mean, I've hung out in ISKCON for over 20 years, but there's this Kirtan wallahs. I'm like, oh my God, like this is the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I've never heard of you. And nobody else has either, And it's like, why is it like, and I don't think this is an ISKCON thing, but, or maybe it is, I don't know, but what's wrong with taking that and bringing it to an audience of, like, say, meat eaters? Like, hey, look, I'm sorry they eat meat too, and it's not ideal, but don't we want to help get them to the place?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to figure it out, because I do want more Kirtan in more places,
Yeah, and like you said, there's just there's so much beauty and so many amazing things that are not being shared, and it's a disservice.
I'm not asking you to take on ISKCON. I'm just saying, like, how does this work?
I think that there's one thing to say, that the personal practice, like when I'm with Mayapuris and my band and we sing together, we've done it for so long, we read each other, we also check each other when it comes to our approach to life and our spiritual practices. We're so that strengthening that we have as a core group together, and maybe more widely in the wider kind of Hare Krishna Kirtan circle and stuff like that. There's a power to that. There's a power where everyone is singing to Krishna for Krishna's pleasure. We're not trying to sell something. We're not trying to advertise ourselves, things like that. So there's something to say about that personal practice. Even Chaitanya, although he brought it out to the streets, before doing that, there was like him and just close associates would get together every night, and behind closed doors they would sing. So they would actually close the doors, and and not everybody was allowed in. It was very kind of chosen and specific. So that strengthened the core group to then be fully like, okay, we got this now. Now we can go and share with anybody, with the Muslim meat eaters, as the whoever, and the prostitutes and the drunkards and like that. Then they came out and they were able to not be intimidated and not feel like their spiritual practice would in any way be that they would, so to say, fall down from their spiritual practice. And I think that takes a real it takes a maturity, and I think that we're getting there. We're getting there.
Okay.
When you're
fair enough,
when you're just trying to, there are, you have to be careful of your association. I have to be careful about who I associate with, because, I may have habits that come back to me, that come back if I'm in the wrong association. So even though there is Kirtan, there's Bhakti happening there, it may not be, it may not be the right resonance for me where I'm at right now. But once I'm fully embodied in my offering and what I'm meant to be, then there's not going to be that question anymore. And I think that it's getting there. I feel that it's getting there. There is a more opening and a more sharing, and devotees of Neem Karoli Baba lineage, and devotees of Yogananda lineages, and Pushti Marg lineages, and I've been told by some of my teachers that, I've asked them these questions, like, why do we stay insulated, and why do everyone kind of stays in their own thing? And I've been blessed by many of my teachers to be like, go, as the generations mature, maybe, and learn from the mistakes of the previous generations, we can actually come together, find our commonality. And there's so few of us, this Bhakti Fest that we're here is probably the biggest Bhakti Fest, Bhakti celebration in the world right now, and it's still only like a few thousand people.
Yeah, right.
So it's tiny, really. Yeah. But there is a strengthening and a in the dialogue and in the conversation that we have, which I would love for there to be more of that dialogue in you know, what's our commonality? What are the differences? Let's talk about it, and let's discuss it, and let's put it on the table and find. And I have so much to learn from you, and vice, you know, we share.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm really positive about it all, but
no.
optimistic.
I think so too. Hey, and at the very, you know, also at the very least, I'm always also looking for the lowest common denominator in the sense of just trying to spread things wide, and that Kirtan just being accepted as a genre of music. I know it's like it's a devotional path. I get it, but you know, now I'm just starting to even see that. Like, I know more and more people kind of in the mainstream secular music business who understand what Kirtan is now.
Yeah.
They've heard of Krishnadas. They've heard of, like, you know, they're like, oh, okay, I get what that is. And you know, even because I still feel that getting anybody to chant mantra is a gateway. You know, you never know what can happen after that.
Yeah.
You know, right?
Yeah. One step at a time.
One step at a time.
I think when we're patient with ourselves, and we're patient with others, and we know that, you know, it's a process, and that process, but like you said, you know, the seeds are planted, the seeds of devotion are planted just by hearing the mantra one time. Just by hearing it, it's said that the seed is planted within the heart. So how do we water that? How do we nurture that? Well, I personally find like-minded people and stick with them, and through that, you know, feel empowered.
Vish, thank you. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for this opportunity to share.
Thank you, brother.